It started as an itch, a craving, a low rumble in the dark corners of my mind that I could no longer suppress. The world saw me as polished, affable, ambitious. But beneath the carefully constructed mask, there was something else, something primal. The urge had been growing for years, fed by fantasies I kept locked away from even my closest confidants. Karen Sparks, though she didn't know it, was the embodiment of everything I desired. Or perhaps she was simply convenient. Proximity matters, after all. I'd seen her before, of course, and she lived near the university, part of a tight-knit community that celebrated their youth with laughter and music, spilling out of open windows. The details of her life didn't matter to me. She could have been anyone. But there was something about the vulnerability in her gait, the way she walked home alone late at night, oblivious to the shadow trailing her. Karen Sparks became the vessel for my dark ambitions. The night of January 3rd, 1974, was cold, the kind of chill that cuts through layers of clothing and bites at your skin. I'd been circling the neighborhood for hours, a predator looking for the right moment. The house she lived in, a modest basement apartment shared with other students, was quiet. At around 1 a.m., I peered through her window. She was alone, lying in bed, reading a book, if I remember quickly. My heart was racing. Karen looked so vulnerable at that moment. But then she glanced up at the window and looked right at me. We actually made eye contact. In an instant, I leaned back into the shadows. I waited there for what felt like an eternity. Part of me thought about aborting. For all I knew, Karen was already on the phone to the cops. But the next time I looked through the window, Karen was lying, sleeping on her mattress. I would later learn that Karen most definitely had seen me standing outside. But the whole thing had happened so quickly that she had thought I was nothing more than a figment of her imagination. The rear door was unlocked. I moved through the shadows like smoke, silent and insidious. The living room was sparsely decorated. A couch with worn cushions, a coffee table strewn with textbooks. I paused, listening for any sound. Nothing. Her bedroom door was ajar, a sliver of light from the street lamp outside spilling in. Karen lay asleep, her chest rising and falling with a rhythmic intensity. In that moment, standing over her, I felt omnipotent. She was utterly unaware of my presence, vulnerable and unguarded. The crowbar in my hand felt heavy, an extension of the power I held over her life. My pulse quickened, a symphony of adrenaline and anticipation. I brought the metal bar down with calculated force, the sickening crunch of metal meeting bone reverberating in the stillness. Her body convulsed, a marionette with its strings violently tugged. She didn't scream. She didn't have the chance. What followed was a blur of frenzied brutality. Each strike was a release, a cathartic purge of the darkness that had consumed me for so long. Blood pooled around her head, soaking into the sheets, its metallic scent filling the room. Her fragility, her humanity, only served to amplify my sense of control. This was power, pure and unadulterated. In those moments, I was no longer Ted Bundy, aspiring lawyer and charming colleague. I was a god, wielding life and death with impunity. When the storm within me subsided, the enormity of what I'd done began to sink in. Karen's lifeless body lay twisted and broken, a grotesque tableau of my desires made manifest. Yet I felt no remorse. Instead, there was an unsettling calm, a sense of accomplishment. I'd crossed a threshold, and there was no going back. I wiped my hands on the sheets, a futile attempt to erase the evidence of my presence. Careful not to disturb anything else, I retraced my steps through the house, slipping back into the night as easily as I'd entered. The streets were empty, the world blissfully unaware of the horror that had unfolded within those walls. I walked with purpose, my heart still racing, my mind already plotting my next move. In the days that followed, the attack on Karen Sparks was barely a blip on my radar. I read the news reports with a detached curiosity, noting the investigators' inability to piece together the puzzle. Karen had survived, though barely. The doctors called it a miracle, but I knew better. While attacking her, I heard a male voice coming from the next room. That was when I fled the scene. It turned out that the guy in the next room wasn't actually awake. He was just talking in his sleep. Karen's survival is a testament to the fragility of human existence. If that guy hadn't been babbling in his sleep, then she wouldn't be remembered as a survivor of Ted Bundy. The aftermath of the attack was a learning experience. I'd underestimated the extent of the damage, the messiness of violence, but I also realized how easy it was to blend back into society, to slip on the mask and resume my role as the amiable everyman. People saw what they wanted to see, and I was more than happy to oblige. The attack on Karen Sparks became a distant memory, a stepping stone on the path to something greater. People like to label me a monster, a sociopath, incapable of empathy. They're not entirely wrong, but what they fail to understand is that monsters don't exist in isolation. They're created, shaped by the same society that fears them. I was a product of my environment, a reflection of the darker impulses that lurk within us all. Karen Sparks was simply the unfortunate catalyst for my transformation. Looking back, the attack on Karen Sparks was the beginning of a journey that would ultimately define me. It was the first crack in the facade, the moment I began to embrace my true self. Each subsequent act of violence built upon the foundation laid that night, each victim a stepping stone toward a macabre legacy. Karen survived, though her life was forever altered. I've often wondered if she remembers anything, if the scars I left are purely physical, or if they extend to the deepest recesses of her psyche. Does she see my face in her nightmares, or has time blurred the details? It doesn't matter. What matters is that she was the first, the spark that ignited an inferno. As I sit here, recounting the events of that night, I'm struck by the clarity with which I remember every detail. The sensation of the metal bar in my hand, the scent of blood mingling with the stale air of her bedroom. It's all vivid, as though it happened yesterday. Karen Sparks will forever be a part of me, a reminder of the moment I embraced my true nature. They say the first time is always the hardest, but for me it was exhilarating. It was the moment I stopped pretending, the moment I stopped fighting the darkness. Karen Sparks wasn't just a victim. She was the beginning of a legacy, a testament to the power of desire and the lengths to which we'll go to satisfy it. And for that, I'll always remember her.